How does a man go from a 200K engineering job to mopping floors because his own wife helped push him out? Why did she text me to enjoy struggling, like my life was a joke to her? And how did a simple ER visit turn into 3 specialists staring at me like I was a locked file with my name on it? My name is Owen Carter. I am 38 years old. Until a few months ago, I was a senior systems engineer at a company that paid me a little over $200,000 a year. I did not talk much at work. I did not fight for attention. I built things that worked, then I moved on to the next problem. That calm way of living used to feel like strength. Later, I learned it also made it easy for certain people to treat me like furniture. That morning started, like most mornings did, near the end of my marriage. I woke up before my wife, Talia, because my body still followed my old schedule. The kitchen was clean because I cleaned it the night before. The lights were soft. The house was quiet. I made coffee and packed my lunch in the same plain container I always used. I did not do it to be dramatic. I did it because habits keep you steady when other parts of life feel shaky. When Talia came into the kitchen, she did not greet me. She moved past me like I was part of the wall. She opened the fridge, checked her phone, and smiled at something on the screen. The smile was not for me. It never was anymore. I tried small, normal words. I asked how she slept. I asked if she wanted coffee. She answered with short sounds and kept looking at her phone. Her focus stayed on whatever was happening in that device. I watched her posture, the quick taps, the way her face softened. When she looked at me, her expression changed back into something flat and practical. She reminded me that we had a social thing later in the week and said I should not be late. She said it in a tone that made it feel like I was a child who needed reminders. I nodded and told her I understood. In the garage, I noticed her car had more fuel than I remembered. That sounds small, but I tracked details because details told the truth when people did not. She used to complain when she had to stop for fuel. Now she always had it. She used to ask me to come with her to errands. Now she did not. She used to tell me her plans. Now she only told me what I needed to do for her plans. I did not accuse her of anything. Accusing without proof only gives the other person a stage. I was not going to give her a stage. The drive to work was short. I sat in traffic and listened to an old podcast about engineering failures. I liked those episodes because they were simple. A system fails. People review what happened, they look for the cause, they fix what they can. In my personal life, I could feel a failure happening, but I did not yet have a clear map of the cause. I did have a clear map of my job. That day, I planned to finish a stability patch, review a junior engineer's work, and prepare slides for a small internal update. None of that sounded like drama. That was the kind of day I liked. When I walked into the open plan floor, I could feel the mood before anyone spoke to me. People were quieter than usual. They did not look up as much. A few nodded without smiling. The company had grown fast, and the culture had changed with it. There was more talk about image. There were more meetings about meetings. There were more people whose job seemed to be talking about work instead of doing it. I did not blame anyone for wanting to move up. I only noticed how quickly skill became less important than connection. I logged in and checked my calendar. A meeting called Platform Launch Readiness had been moved. The time changed, the list of attendees changed, and my name was not on it anymore. I stared at the screen for a long moment. That meeting used to be mine to run. I built the core system that the launch depended on. I wrote the first design notes. I handled the worst failures in the first year. I trained the new hires. I carried the pager rotation more than anyone else. But now I was not on the list. I refreshed the page once like that could change reality. It did not. I asked a teammate in a calm way if the meeting had been reorganized. He did not answer directly. He said things were changing and leadership wanted a tighter group. He avoided eye contact while he spoke. That told me he knew more than he wanted to say. I thanked him and did not press. I also noticed he looked relieved that I did not press. People sometimes prefer silence, even when silence is wrong. I returned to my desk and opened the work ticket for the patch. My hands did the steps automatically. My mind, however, kept circling around that missing calendar invite like a loose bolt in a machine. Around midday, my manager sent a short message asking me to step into a glass conference room. The tone was casual, like a normal check-in. I brought my notebook. The room smelled like dry marker and old coffee. 2 people from leadership were already there, including Priya Klein, the VP of engineering. Priya smiled the kind of smile people practice. It was polite and clean, with no warmth behind it. She talked about alignment, momentum, and the need for fresh leadership energy. She said the company had to be agile and bold. She also talked about new partnerships and strategic guidance. She did not mention my work once. I listened and took notes. I asked practical questions about system ownership and on-call coverage. Priya answered in broad language. She said they would handle coverage. She said they would distribute responsibilities. I asked if the stability patch should still ship under my name, since it was already in progress. She said they would decide that later, and then she mentioned a person I had never met in the context of our technical direction. She said an outside advisor had strong views on platform strategy. She said his connections could open doors for us. That was the first time I heard Grant Ellison's name inside an official work discussion. When the meeting ended, I walked back to my desk with the same calm face I always wore. Inside, something tightened. Not rage, not panic, more like a quiet alarm. I knew my value. I also knew what it looked like when people started preparing to move someone out. They stop naming your work. They stop inviting you. They talk around you, not to you. They use soft words so you cannot point to anything sharp. In engineering, that is like watching a system degrade slowly while everyone insists it is fine. I worked through the afternoon anyway. I reviewed the patch. I left careful comments for the junior engineer. I cleaned up a messy config file that had caused repeated alerts. Those tasks were familiar. They gave me a steady rhythm. Then, late in the day, I got a message from the front desk. The message said a visitor was here for me. I walked down to the lobby. The lobby had bright lights and a clean smell, like a hotel. There was a small sitting area near the glass doors. Talia was there. She stood in a fitted coat and looked like she belonged in a different life than mine. She was not alone. A tall man stood with her. He had a confident posture, the kind that takes up space without apology. He wore an expensive watch and held his phone like a tool he controlled. He was Grant. Talia introduced him in a way that made it sound like this was normal. She said he was helping with some business relationships and that he wanted to see where I worked. The words were polite, but the intent felt sharp. Grant looked at me like he was evaluating a product. He asked what I did at the company, but he asked it in a way that assumed the answer would be small. I told him I built the platform systems and kept them stable. He nodded slowly, like that was interesting but not important. He said the company needed vision, and he implied that technical people often missed the bigger picture. He said it kindly, with a smile, which made it worse. Talia watched him talk and looked proud. She did not look proud of me. She did not ask about my day. She did not ask if I had eaten. She acted like I was an employee and she was visiting management. A few coworkers walked through the lobby and glanced at us. I could feel their attention. I could feel their questions. I could also feel how Grant and Talia enjoyed being seen together in that place. They wanted the image to land. Grant suggested we all get coffee nearby. Talia agreed before I responded. I said I had work to finish. Talia's face tightened for a second, then she smoothed it out. She told me I should not be difficult. She said it in a calm voice, like she was teaching me how to behave. Grant stepped slightly closer to her, like a protective gesture, but it was also a claim. He did not touch her in a dramatic way. He did not need to. The message was already clear. I told them I hoped they enjoyed their coffee. I kept my tone flat and polite. Then I walked back toward the elevators. I did not look back. I heard Talia's light laugh behind me, like my refusal was a joke. In the elevator, I stared at the floor numbers as they changed. My hands felt cold. I did not feel jealous in a loud way. I felt replaced, like a tool that had been used and set aside. Back at my desk, I tried to focus. I opened my code editor. I ran tests. I wrote down next steps. But my attention kept slipping. Around 7, I finally shut down my computer. I walked to my car in the parking garage. The air smelled like concrete and exhaust. My phone buzzed when I sat in the driver's seat. It was a message from Talia. The message was short. She said I should stop acting proud. She said I should accept that life changes. Then she said I should enjoy struggling, like that was the lesson she wanted to teach me. I did not respond. I read it twice, then I put my phone face down on the passenger seat. At home, the house felt colder than usual. Talia was not there. I reheated leftovers and ate standing at the counter. I washed my plate and dried it. I checked the living room, the hallway, the quiet places where you notice what is missing. I did not cry. I did not throw anything. I just felt a new, clean understanding settle inside me. Before bed, I opened my calendar again. There was a new invite. It was from HR. The title said it was a quick chat. The time was early the next morning. There was no agenda. That was how they did it when they wanted control. I saved the invite, turned off the lights, and lay down on the couch. I stared at the ceiling and listened to the silence, and I let my mind begin to shift from hoping to knowing. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. I did not feel rested. I felt alert in a tired way, like my body knew something important was waiting. I made coffee again, but it tasted bitter. I checked my phone and saw the HR invite still sitting there. It was short and clean. No details, no agenda. Just a time, a room, and a name I barely knew. I went to work early. I wanted to look normal. I did not want anyone to see me rushing or sweating or asking questions in the hallway. When you work in a place full of bright people, they learn how to read small signals. I had learned that too. I walked in, nodded at the security desk, and went straight to my floor. I sat down and started the same routines I always did. I answered messages. I reviewed a ticket. I wrote 2 lines of documentation. I did those things because they kept me steady. At the time of the HR meeting, I stood up and walked there like it was a dentist appointment. The HR room was small and had a plant that looked fake. The HR lead, Maren Soto, greeted me with a careful smile. She talked about alignment and culture. She said the company was entering a new phase. She said leadership wanted to reduce risk and move faster. She also said they were offering me options that could help me transition smoothly. I listened and asked what those options were. She explained a package and a timeline. She said I could sign and leave quietly, or I could stay on for a short handover period. She said this would protect my reputation. She also said it would be best for everyone if we stayed professional. I noticed how often she used the word everyone. People use that word when they want you to feel alone. I kept my tone calm. I asked who decided this and why now. She said it was a leadership decision. She said it was not personal. She said the company had to focus on the future. I asked if my performance had been questioned. She said my performance was strong. Then she said the role was changing and they needed a different shape. That was the phrase she used. A different shape. It made me feel like a piece of furniture being replaced because it no longer matched the room. I left the HR room and walked back to my desk. My hands were steady, but my mind felt like it was moving through thick air. I knew this was the start of a story they were already telling about me. If I reacted, they would point at my reaction as proof. If I stayed calm, they would call it acceptance. In that moment, I realized something simple. I could not win by speaking to them in feelings. I needed facts and time. That afternoon, I started thinking backward. I did not do it for nostalgia. I did it to find the first crack in the system. I wanted to know when respect started to leak out of my life. I wanted to know when people learned they could take from me and still act like they were doing me a favor. I met Talia 8 years earlier. It was at a small friend gathering at a restaurant. She was bright and quick and liked to ask questions. She asked about my work, but she also asked about my childhood, my habits, my goals. She said she liked that I was steady. She said she felt safe around me. I remember feeling proud because I had worked hard to become that kind of man. Not loud, not dramatic, just stable. When we started dating, I paid attention to what she needed. She was building her career and trying to move into a higher circle. She liked events where people dressed well and talked about business and travel. I did not love those events, but I went because she wanted me there. I learned how to stand in small groups and talk about simple things. I asked people questions. I smiled when it was my turn. I did not try to shine, I tried to support. After we married, I thought our home would be a quiet place. At first it was. We cooked together. We watched shows on the couch. We planned small trips. But the more my career grew, the more her attention shifted away from me and toward what my career represented. When I got my big raise, she celebrated, but her words sounded like she was celebrating a door opening, not a person. She started saying we needed to live a certain way. She started saying people notice things. She wanted new furniture, new photos, new friends. I told myself it was normal. I told myself people change. I worked more because the company needed me. I became the person who fixed the hard problems. When a system failed late at night, I was the one who answered. When a launch needed support, I was the one who stayed. I missed dinners. I missed weekends. I thought I was building a future that would make both of us proud. Talia did not complain at first. She said she understood. She said we were a team. But over time, her tone shifted. When I came home late, she looked at me like I was inconvenient. When I talked about a hard day, she looked bored. When I tried to plan simple quiet time, she said we needed to be seen. She started attending events without me. Now, she said it was easier that way. There were small moments that hurt more than big arguments. At one dinner with her friends, someone asked what I did. I started to explain my role, and Talia cut in and summarized it in a way that made it sound simple. She said I kept things running. She said it like I was maintenance, not design. People nodded and moved on. I sat there and finished my food. I did not correct her in public. I told myself it was not worth it. At another event, a man asked Talia what she did, and she spoke for a long time, bright and animated. When he asked about me again, she gave a short answer and changed the subject. Later, in the car, I told her I felt erased. She told me I was overthinking. She said people do not care about details. She said I should relax and stop needing attention. That word attention stayed in my head for days because I had never been the kind of man who chased attention. I only wanted basic respect. Work started changing too. A new wave of leaders came in. They loved big words and fast promises. They liked slide decks more than system logs. They liked meetings where people performed confidence. I stayed the same. I built. I documented. I tested. That used to be rewarded. Later it became easy to ignore. The first time I felt truly sidelined was in a planning session when Priya asked for ideas, and I gave a careful risk assessment. I explained what could break and what we needed to fix first. She thanked me in a flat way and then praised someone else who offered a bold timeline. The room leaned toward the bold timeline because it sounded exciting. I sat back and took notes. I did not argue. But I noticed how the room treated careful truth like it was an obstacle. Around that time, Talia started mentioning Grant's name. She described him as connected and supportive. She said he understood how things worked at a high level. She said he had a way of opening doors. At first, I assumed he was just another person in her social world. Then she started comparing. She said Grant had energy. She said Grant made her feel seen. She said I was always tired. She said my work was important, but it made me dull. I tried to fix the gap in a normal way. I planned a weekend trip. I reserved a table at a quiet place she used to like. She agreed, but she spent most of the time on her phone. When I asked what was going on, she said she had to keep up with people. She said opportunities do not wait. I looked at her hands moving across the screen, and I felt like I was sitting across from a job interview, not a partner. Soon after that, she stopped inviting me into her inner conversations. She made decisions and informed me afterward. She moved money between accounts without asking. She signed us up for things and told me I needed to attend. If I hesitated, she acted like I was embarrassing her. She said I did not understand how the world worked. She said I was lucky she was guiding us. I also noticed the way she spoke about me when she thought I was not listening. She would be on a call, and her voice would shift into a lighter tone. If I walked into the room, the tone would change again. She would cover the phone and say she was busy. She started leaving the house dressed up on random evenings. She said it was networking. She did not give details. I told myself not to be suspicious. I told myself to trust my wife, but trust without truth is just hope. The day I saw her in the lobby with Grant was not the first time I felt the weight of that hope collapsing. It was the first time I saw the two worlds overlap in public. My home life and my work life touched each other, and the touch felt deliberate. I started noticing small signals at work, too. Grant's name appeared in emails about strategy. People treated his opinions like they were facts. A few leaders began speaking as if the company had new protectors. They stopped asking my team for technical reality. They asked for reassurance. I had one conversation with a senior coworker I trusted. He did not say much, but he hinted that powerful people wanted to reshape the org chart. He hinted that my salary was a problem for them. He hinted that they had friends who could bring in outside money and wanted to reward those friends. He did not name Talia. He did not name Grant. He did not need to. The pattern was clear. At home, I tried one more serious talk with Talia. I told her I felt like she had already left the marriage in her mind. I told her I needed honesty. She listened with crossed arms and said I was being dramatic. She said I should focus on improving myself. She said I should not blame her for wanting more from life. She did not deny anything directly. She just made me feel like the question itself was wrong. That was the real shift for me. Not anger, not jealousy, clarity. When someone refuses to answer a simple, honest question, they are not protecting peace. They are protecting a plan. I went back to the couch that night, stared at the ceiling again, and accepted that my life had become a story other people were writing for me. The HR meeting the next morning confirmed it. The company was preparing my exit, and my wife was already acting like it was done. By the time I got back to my desk after that HR meeting, the office felt different. Nothing had changed on the surface. People still typed, screens still glowed, the same snacks sat in the kitchen, but I could feel a new distance around me, like someone had drawn a line and everyone knew not to step over it. I kept working because I did not know what else to do in that moment. I finished the stability patch and wrote clear notes. I updated documentation that I knew other teams depended on. I left a clean trail, not because I wanted to help the people who were pushing me out, but because that is how I was built. I do not like loose ends. I do not like leaving a system in a fragile state just because my feelings are hurt. Later that day, my access started changing in small ways. A tool I used every morning suddenly asked for approval. A shared folder showed a permissions error. A dashboard I built was visible, but I could no longer edit it. When you work with systems, you learn to read those signals. Someone was slowly closing doors. They wanted me to keep producing, while they removed my ability to protect what I produced. A little after lunch, my manager asked me to sit with a new contractor who had joined the team. The contractor was polite and energetic. He asked basic questions that a senior hire would not need to ask. I answered calmly. I walked him through the architecture. I showed him the alert patterns. I explained the risk areas. He nodded and took notes like this was normal onboarding. I realized halfway through that I was training a replacement without being told that was what I was doing. When the session ended, my manager thanked me and said I was being helpful. He did not look me in the eye. He left quickly, like he was late to something. I sat at my desk and stared at the screen. My hands stayed still for a few seconds. My mind did not race. It just went quiet. A calm quiet. The kind you get when you finally accept that the decision has already been made and your job is no longer to persuade anyone. That evening, Priya called a short meeting with a small group. I was included, which surprised me. She spoke in her smooth leadership voice and said the company needed unity and speed. She said the launch was critical and the board would be watching. She said we should be proud of the progress. Then she introduced a new advisory role, and she used Grant's name again. Grant was there on video. His background looked like a modern office with expensive lights. He spoke like someone giving directions, not suggestions. He said the company needed to focus on what looked strong to partners. He said some teams were too careful and too slow. He said bold moves build trust. Priya praised him and said his guidance would help everyone. I watched the faces around the table. A few people smiled as if they were relieved. Some nodded like they had been waiting for permission to ignore technical concerns. I asked one simple question about system risk and customer impact. Priya thanked me and said we would handle details later. Then she moved on. It was a small moment, but it made something clear. This was no longer a technical conversation. It was a power conversation, and I was not invited to power. On the way out, I walked past the lobby again and saw Talia standing near the front desk. She was dressed for an evening out. Grant stood beside her in the same confident posture. They looked like they belonged there. Talia waved at me, but it was not warm. It was like she was signaling that she controlled the scene. I approached and kept my face calm. Talia said she was just stopping by because Grant had meetings nearby. Grant greeted me like a person greeting someone who had already lost. He spoke in a friendly tone and asked how I was handling work. I told him I was handling my responsibilities. He nodded and said it was good to stay useful during transitions. He said it as if he knew my situation better than I did. Talia looked at me and said I should not take things personally. She said the world changes and people need to adapt. She said I had always been good at being stable, and now I should be stable again. The words sounded like advice, but they felt like a push. I realized she was not here by accident. She was here to watch my reaction. She wanted to see if I would shrink. I did not give her that. I told her I needed to finish a few tasks and I would be home later. She rolled her eyes slightly, like I was still disappointing her. Grant said I should not work too hard, like he was doing me a favor. Then the two of them walked out together. They moved in step, like they had done it 100 times. That night at home, Talia did not ask about my day. She was already dressed and ready to leave again. She said she had an event, and it was important. I asked if we could talk first. She sighed like I was delaying her. I told her HR had started a process at work, and I needed to understand where we stood as a couple. Talia listened for a moment, then said I was making everything heavy. She said I always turned small problems into big ones. She said I should stop acting like a victim of the world. She said if I lost my job, it would be my job to rebuild, not her job to comfort me. She said she did not sign up for a life where she had to carry someone who was not moving forward. I asked her if Grant was more than a friend. Her eyes did not widen. Her face did not show surprise. She simply looked annoyed that I asked. She said Grant understood her. She said Grant did not need to be pushed. She said he had drive. She said he had connections. Then she said something that made my stomach feel hollow. She said she needed a partner who could match her direction, not someone who needed her patience. She did not say it with anger. That was what made it harder. She said it like a conclusion, like she had already told herself this story many times, and now she was just informing me of it. I did not argue. I did not plead. I only said I wanted honesty and a clean process. She laughed softly and said I always wanted process, like it was a personality problem. Then she told me she would be staying out late and I should not wait up. She picked up her bag and left. I sat alone in the kitchen for a long time. The house was quiet again, but it felt like a different kind of quiet. I looked at the place settings, the clean counter, the soft light. I realized how much of my life I had built around holding things together so other people could move freely. In the days that followed, the pressure at work became more direct. HR sent follow-up messages asking when I would sign. My manager scheduled more handover sessions and more knowledge transfers. The contractor asked me for access to things that only I had. I gave him what was necessary for operations, but I started noting every request and every change in a way that stayed private. I did not tell anyone I was doing it. I simply did it. the same way I would log a system change before it caused a failure. One afternoon, Priya walked past my desk with a small group. She stopped and spoke in a bright tone, like we were friends. She said she appreciated my contributions and hoped I would make the right choice for my future. The group behind her smiled politely. It felt like a performance for witnesses. I thanked her and said I understood. After she left, a coworker I trusted came by and lowered his voice. He said people were talking about me like I was already gone. He said they were saying my role was too expensive and too slow. He said they were telling a story that I was not adaptable. He looked uncomfortable saying it, like he was handing me a dirty object. I thanked him. I told him I wanted to hear truth, not comfort. That evening I came home and found Grant in my living room. He was sitting like he belonged there. His shoes were off. A glass of water sat on the table. Talia stood near him, relaxed, like she was hosting. She looked at me and said Grant had stopped by to check on her because she had been stressed. Then she said we should all talk like adults. Grant stood and spoke in a calm, confident way. He said he respected me. He said he knew this was uncomfortable. He said he cared about Talia and wanted her to be supported. He said it as if he was already the person responsible for her well-being. He suggested we should consider a clean separation so everyone could move forward. I looked at Talia. She did not object. She did not correct him. She did not say I was still her husband and this was not his place. She simply watched me to see what I would do. That was the line. Not the lobby scene, not the messages, not the HR meeting. This was the line. My wife had brought another man into our home to speak to me like I was a problem to manage. She did it without shame. She did it without fear. She did it because she believed I would accept it quietly. I kept my voice even. I said this was my home too, and I would not discuss life decisions in front of a guest. Grant said he understood, but he did not move toward the door. Talia told him it was fine and he could stay. She told me I was being difficult again. She said I always needed control. She said this could be simple if I stopped acting like everything was an attack. I felt something shift inside me. It was not rage. It was not a desire to hurt anyone. It was clarity, clean and cold. I realized Talia and Grant were not speaking to me as a partner or even as a person. They were speaking to me as an obstacle in their schedule. I told them I would be sleeping somewhere else for a while. Talia shrugged, like that was convenient. Grant nodded as if he had expected it. I walked into the bedroom, pulled a bag from the closet, and packed only what I needed. Clothes, toiletries, my laptop, and a small box of personal items from my desk. Before I left, I walked to my home office and opened my computer. I created a new folder with a plain name. I did not put anything dramatic in it. I simply started organizing. I saved messages. I saved calendar entries. I noted dates. I made a timeline. I did it quietly, like a man preparing for a meeting, not a fight. Then I drove to a small rental studio I had found online earlier that week. I had not told Talia about it. I had prepared it as a safety step, just in case. When I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the place smelled like fresh paint and emptiness. There was no comfort there, but there was peace. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall and listened to my own breathing. For the first time in a long time, I did not feel like I was waiting for someone else's approval. I felt like I was finally standing in my own life again. Later that night, I called my old mentor, Elias Rendon. He answered in his steady voice and asked what was going on. I told him the simple version. I told him I had been pushed out and my marriage was collapsing in the same direction. Elias did not act shocked. He only told me to stay calm and be precise. He told me to think in timelines and systems, not emotions. He told me to protect myself the right way. When I ended the call, I opened my notebook and wrote a few words on the first page. I wrote that I would not argue for respect anymore. I would document reality. I would act through the systems people pretend to respect. Then I closed the notebook, turned off the light, and lay down on the bare mattress in my new place, feeling tired in my bones but clear in my mind. The next week became a routine of small, careful steps. I still went to the office because I needed income and because I wanted to look normal. I arrived on time, greeted people the same way, and kept my voice steady. Inside, I started treating my life like a system that needed a full review, not for revenge, for safety. I had learned, in both marriage and work, that the person who controls the story often wins. I did not want control of the story. I wanted the truth to be easy to prove. I began with simple organization. Each evening in my studio, I opened my laptop and wrote down dates. I noted the HR invite. I noted when my meeting access changed. I noted when Talia appeared at my workplace and who she was with. I saved messages into a private archive. I saved screenshots of calendar changes. I kept it boring and clean. I named files with dates and short labels, nothing emotional. That way, if someone else ever read them, it would not look like a man writing a diary. It would look like a record of events. That mattered more than I expected. At work, they kept pushing handover sessions. My manager sent polite reminders and framed them as support. The contractor kept asking for deeper access and more context. I gave him enough to do his job, but I stopped offering extra. I also stopped speaking in long explanations. I answered only what was asked. When leadership spoke to me, they used warm words and careful smiles. They thanked me for my contributions. They talked about my future like it was already decided. They wanted me to sign the package and disappear with a friendly face. I did not sign. I simply said I was reviewing my options. One afternoon, I noticed Priya walking the floor with a small group of people I did not recognize. They wore visitor badges and carried themselves like they were important. Priya stopped near my desk for a few seconds, said something about appreciating my years of work, and then moved on. It was short, but I understood the purpose. It was a public display. She wanted witnesses to see her being gracious. She wanted it to look like the company was doing the right thing, even while they were pushing me out. I watched the visitors glance at my desk, then look away like I was already past tense. That same day, a teammate sent me a quiet message and asked if I had heard about the launch celebration. He said the board would attend and the company planned a big internal meeting. He did not say it directly, but the message carried a warning. Big meetings create clean endings. People like Priya and Grant did not want my exit to be messy. They wanted a neat story with applause at the end, not questions. I thanked my teammate and told him I was fine. Then I saved the meeting date in my calendar and left it there like a marker. I also started making calls I had avoided for too long. I called a lawyer's office that Elias recommended. I did not call in a dramatic way. I simply asked for an appointment. When I went in, the waiting area smelled like paper and coffee. The chairs were comfortable but plain. I sat with my hands folded and watched people come and go. Everyone looked tired in a different way. Some looked angry. Some looked scared. I felt calm, which surprised me. The lawyer listened while I described my work situation and my marriage situation in simple facts. I did not use heavy emotion. I focused on timelines and behaviors. The lawyer asked careful questions, then told me to keep doing what I was doing. He said clean records and patience matter. He also said I needed to protect my finances and my identity, because those are the first places people try to control when a separation begins. The next step was a bank appointment. I sat at a private desk with a representative who spoke softly. I moved my direct deposit to an account only I controlled. I set up alerts for any changes. I reviewed shared accounts and made a list of what was tied to both names. I did not empty anything. I did not do anything aggressive. I only made sure I could stand on my own feet if Talia decided to pull a lever. The bank representative asked if everything was okay. I told her I was reorganizing after a job change. She nodded like she had heard that sentence many times. At home, my studio became a small planning space. I bought a cheap file box and a few folders. I placed them on a shelf like they were normal household items. I kept everything neat. I did not tell friends. I did not post online. I did not confront Talia. Silence can be protection when you are dealing with people who enjoy controlling reactions. Talia did try to contact me, but her tone shifted from cold to sweet and back again. One day she acted concerned and asked if I was eating. The next day she acted annoyed and said I was being difficult by not coming home to talk. I answered only with practical messages about logistics. I did not explain my feelings. I did not argue about history. I kept every message short. The job situation moved faster than I expected. The company cut my access again, and then HR sent a note saying my handover period had a deadline. They wanted my signature. They wanted a final meeting. I knew the package would not cover my long-term stability, and I knew signing would weaken my position in any dispute about what I built. Still, I needed income, and I needed a place to put my energy while I worked through this properly. And through a staffing agency, I took a janitor job at a large medical office building. It was not a mistake, it was survival. I showed up in plain work clothes, learned the routes, learned the supply system, and kept my head down. The work was physical and quiet. It made time move differently. In the supply closet, I met Nina Park, another cleaner who had worked there longer than me. She was the kind of person who spoke only when it mattered. She noticed I moved like someone used to office work, not physical work. She asked what I did before. I told her I used to be an engineer and my job ended. She did not act impressed or dismissive. She simply said life turns fast. Over the next few days, she showed me how to avoid mistakes that waste time. She also showed me where the best gloves were and how to keep your hands from cracking in winter. Her calm kindness did something important. It reminded me that respect does not always come from power. Sometimes it comes from people who know what effort looks like. At night, my body felt heavy from the new job. My hands ached, but my mind stayed clear. I continued organizing my notes and files. I reviewed my old performance messages from work, the ones that praised my results. I saved them. I reviewed the dates of product releases and incidents I handled. I listed them in a simple timeline. I made sure each claim had a support behind it. I did not print anything. I did not wave anything around. I just made sure it existed and was easy to find. I also made a list of people who had seen key events, like Talia showing up at the office with Grant. Not to drag them in, only to know who might remember, if asked. Talia's confidence grew as my life got smaller. She began sending messages that sounded like instructions. She told me to come home and have a grown conversation. She told me to stop hiding. She told me to accept reality. She also mentioned that Grant had friends who could help her protect her future. The way she wrote it felt like a warning, wrapped in a polite ribbon. I did not respond with fear. I responded with a simple sentence about keeping communication calm and practical. Then I stopped texting for the day. At work, the contractor started showing up in meetings I used to lead. People talked over him at first, then started treating him like my replacement. I watched it happen from the edges. I did not correct every mistake. I corrected the ones that could cause a system failure because I did not want innocent teams to suffer. But I also stopped saving leadership from consequences they created. If they wanted to ignore careful warnings, they could own that choice. I took notes of what I said, and when I said it, then I let the room move on. Near the end of that week, I received another calendar notification about the launch celebration meeting. The subject line looked cheerful. The attendee list included board members. It also included Priya and a few people from legal and finance. That detail stood out. Celebrations do not usually need legal and finance. That told me the meeting was more than a party. It was a control point, a place where decisions could be made in a clean, public way. I saved the details and closed my laptop. I sat in the quiet of my studio and listened to the building's pipes and distant footsteps. My life was smaller now, yes, but the smaller it became, the easier it was to see what mattered. I called Elias again and gave him a simple update. He told me to keep my tone calm and my steps legal. He said people like Grant rely on confidence and fog. He said the best way to handle that is to create clear air. After the call, I stood by my small window and looked at the streetlights. I did not feel excited. I did not feel afraid. I felt ready to stay patient. The people who pushed me out expected me to break or beg. They expected me to disappear into shame. Instead, I was building a record, a timeline, and a steady base. Quietly, carefully. The same way I built systems that lasted. The weekend after I started the janitor job, my body felt like it had learned a new language. My shoulders were sore. My hands were dry. I could still feel the shape of the mop handle in my palms even after I showered. I stood in my small studio and looked at the file box on the shelf. It was not dramatic. It was not a secret safe. It was just a plain box with folders inside. Still, it was the first thing in weeks that made me feel like I had control over my own life. On Monday morning, I went to the medical office building early. I wanted the quiet hour before people arrived. The building was calm then. The lights were softer. The hallways were empty, and the floor polish smell was still fresh. Nina waved at me from the supply area and asked if my hands were holding up. I nodded and showed her the cheap gloves I bought. She told me to double up and use lotion before bed. She said people think cleaning is simple until their skin cracks. I thanked her and followed my route. Around mid-morning, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I was in a side hallway near a storage closet. I checked the screen and saw an email from my old company. The subject line mentioned the launch celebration meeting again. The date was close. The location was the company boardroom. The message used bright words about teamwork and progress, but it also mentioned attendance was required for select staff. My name was not on it. That part did not surprise me anymore. What surprised me was that I was copied at all. It felt like they wanted me to see it, like they wanted me to know I was not welcome. I did not reply. I saved the email. Then I put my phone away and went back to work. That was my new pattern. Notice, save, continue, calm actions, no performance. That evening I went to my studio, ate a simple meal, and then called the lawyer again. I spoke in the same steady tone as before. I gave updates about HR messages and the meeting invite. I also mentioned Talia's recent texts, the ones that sounded like polite warnings. The lawyer did not react emotionally. He asked for dates. He asked for exact wording. He asked me what I wanted as an outcome. I told him I wanted a clean separation, financial safety, and the ability to protect my professional reputation. He told me to keep communication simple and avoid arguments. He also told me to prepare for a moment when they would try to force a decision in a public way. He said that is how confident people win. They create pressure and expect you to break in front of witnesses. He said the best response is to stay calm and use process. Then he reminded me again that timing matters. He did not say more. He did not need to. I understood what he meant. The next day, HR sent another message asking if I was ready to sign. Marin wrote in a friendly tone and said leadership wanted to close the loop. She said it would be good for everyone to move forward. She asked if I was still planning to attend a final transition meeting. I replied with one sentence saying I was reviewing options and would respond through proper channels. I kept it plain, I kept it polite, then I saved her message too. That night Talia called me for the first time in weeks. I watched the phone ring. Her name on the screen still made my stomach tighten. I answered because avoiding calls can be used against you later. I kept my voice calm. Talia spoke like she was exhausted with me. She said we needed to stop dragging things out. She said Grant was helping her understand her options, and it would be better for both of us if we acted like adults. She said she was willing to be fair, but she was not willing to wait forever. She said the world does not pause for people who cannot keep up. I told her I agreed that dragging things out helps no one. I told her I wanted calm communication and a clean process. She laughed softly and said I always hid behind process. She said I should accept that she was moving on, then she said something that confirmed what I already knew. She said the company was doing what was best, and I should not act surprised. She said people choose winners, and I should not blame her for choosing a winner. I did not argue. I only asked one simple question. I asked if she had taken any steps that affected my work situation. There was a pause on the line. Then she said I was imagining things. She said I was looking for someone to blame because I could not face my own decline. The way she spoke was smooth, like she had practiced it. That was enough for me. I told her I had to go to sleep for work. She ended the call without saying goodbye. After that, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. The studio was quiet except for distant traffic. I did not feel sadness in a dramatic way. I felt a steady pressure in my chest, like a weight that had been there for months and was now fully visible. I walked to the shelf, opened the file box, and added a note about the call with the date and time. Then I closed the box and turned off the light. In the days that followed, I made a few more quiet moves. I met the lawyer again. I met the bank representative again. I changed small settings and updated contact methods. I kept my actions within the rules. No tricks, no hidden games, just proper steps. Each step was boring on its own. Together they made me feel safer. Work at the medical building stayed steady. I cleaned offices, emptied bins, wiped counters, and worked around people who did not know anything about my old life. Some smiled, some ignored me. Nina talked when she had something useful to say. That place did not care about titles. It cared about whether the floors were clean and whether the bathrooms stayed stocked. In a strange way, it gave me a break. No one expected me to perform confidence. No one asked me to be a symbol. They just expected consistent work. On Thursday, near the end of my shift, I was restocking supplies in a small kitchenette area. The cabinet hinge caught my hand in a bad angle. It was a quick pinch and then a sharp sting. I pulled my hand back fast. The skin split in a thin line. It was not a dramatic injury, but it was deep enough that it would not close neatly. I pressed a paper towel against it and waited for the sting to calm down. Nina saw me and told me to go rinse it. She looked at my hand and said I should get it checked properly. I told her it was fine. She shook her head and said small injuries can get complicated if you ignore them. She said it like someone who had learned the hard way. I listened. After my shift, I drove to the hospital. I chose a place that was busy enough to be normal and quiet enough to be quick. The ER intake area had bright lights and rows of chairs. People sat with tired faces, holding papers, staring at phones, or looking at the floor. I checked in, gave my information, and waited. When they called my name, a nurse cleaned the cut and asked basic questions. She asked if I had any conditions, allergies, or medications. I answered no and no. She asked when my last checkup was. I told her it had been a while. She said they would run a few routine labs since I was there anyway, just to be safe. I agreed. I did not think much of it. It felt like standard procedure. A doctor came in later. Dr. Chen introduced himself and examined my hand. He said it would likely need a few stitches. He spoke calmly, like someone used to keeping people steady. He asked about my work, and I told him I cleaned offices now. He looked at my hands for a moment and asked what I did before. I told him I was an engineer. He nodded like he had learned not to assume anything from a uniform. The stitches were quick. The doctor gave simple instructions for care and told me to keep it clean and come back if it swelled or got worse. I was ready to leave. Then he paused and looked at a screen. His face changed slightly. Not fear, not panic. Just a quiet seriousness. He asked me to wait a moment. He stepped out of the room. I sat there alone and listened to the hallway sounds. A cart rolled by. Someone spoke softly behind a curtain. A machine beeped in the distance. I watched the clock and tried to stay calm. The cut on my hand did not hurt much anymore, but I felt a new tension in my stomach, the kind you feel when a routine moment stops being routine. Dr. Chen came back and closed the door gently. He sat down instead of standing. That detail mattered. Doctors stand when they are rushing. They sit when the conversation needs weight. He said some of my lab results were unusual and he wanted to double-check. He said it was likely nothing urgent, but he did not want to ignore it. He asked me a few questions about my family history. I told him what I knew, which was not much beyond the basics. My parents raised me. They were private people. They did not talk about extended family often. Dr. Chen nodded slowly and said he wanted to bring in a specialist to review something. He said it could be a lab issue, but he wanted to be careful. He stepped out again. A little later, a second doctor came in, then a third. They were polite, professional, and very focused. They did not talk to me like I was in trouble. They talked to me like I was a puzzle they needed to handle correctly. One of them, an older specialist, asked me again about family history. I repeated what I knew. She asked if I had ever taken a genetic test. I said no. She asked if I was certain about certain family details, like birth records and early years. I told her I believed so, but I had never needed to question it. They looked at each other in a way that was careful. Then the older specialist said there was a marker in my DNA that suggested a close relation to someone in a database used for medical matching. She said this was not the type of result they saw by accident. She said sometimes it happens when families have hidden information or when a record was never shared. She told me they needed to run a confirmation step before saying more. I asked who the person was. She did not answer directly. She said they could not state a name yet because they needed to verify and follow proper rules. She said they would contact me soon. Dr. Chen said I should answer calls from the hospital number and come back if asked. His voice stayed calm, but his eyes were serious. It was the kind of seriousness that makes your mouth dry. I left the hospital with a bandage on my hand and a strange stillness in my mind. The night air felt cold and sharp. I sat in my car and stared at the steering wheel for a long time. I had come in for a simple cut. I was leaving with the feeling that my life had another layer I did not understand. At home, I washed my face, ate something small, and tried to sleep. But my mind kept replaying the words. Close relation, database, hidden information, proper rules. I did not jump to wild ideas. I just felt unsettled. If there was something true about my identity that I did not know, it could change more than my emotions. It could change how institutions treated me. It could change what I could ask for and what I could prove. The next morning, I got an email from my old company again. The boardroom meeting was confirmed. The time was set. The list of board members was included this time. I read it slowly. I did not feel fear. I felt a steady readiness, like the pieces were moving into position without me forcing them. That afternoon, the hospital number called. I missed it because I was working. They left a voicemail asking me to call back and schedule a short follow-up. The message was polite, but it had urgency under the politeness. I saved the voicemail. I wrote down the time of the call. Then I put my phone away and finished my route. That night, I sat in my studio with my bandaged hand resting on the table. I looked at my calendar. The boardroom meeting was close. The hospital follow-up was close. The lawyer appointment was already set. I did not feel excitement. I did not feel anger. I felt steady. For months, people had treated me like a man who would quietly accept whatever they decided for him. They had counted on me being too tired, too polite, and too alone to respond properly. Now I had something they did not expect. I had a record. I had support from professionals who worked in rules and procedures. And I had a new question about my own identity that was big enough to pull attention from people who usually never looked my way. I turned off the light and lay down. The studio was quiet. My hand throbbed lightly under the bandage. I stared at the ceiling and breathed slowly. So whatever was coming next, I would meet it the same way I met everything else. Calm, precise. And through the systems that decide what is real. I went back to the hospital 2 days later because Dr. Chen's office called me again and said the confirmation step was done. They brought me into a small consultation room and asked me to sign a consent form so they could explain what they found. The specialist, Dr. Lasky, spoke slowly and used simple language. She said the genetic match was real. She said it was not a distant match. It was a close match. She then said the person I matched to was Clara Vance. I knew that name without needing to think. Clara Vance was the chair of my former company's board. Her name was on press releases. Her photo was on investor pages. She was the kind of person people stood up straighter around. Dr. Lasky said the system flagged it because Clara had medical data in a matching network for a past procedure. She said there were only a few relationship types that create a match that strong. She did not speak like gossip, she spoke like procedure. My mouth went dry. I told her I did not understand. I told her I grew up with two parents who raised me, and I had no reason to question it. Dr. Lasky said families sometimes keep old decisions private, and sometimes records are incomplete. She said they could not tell me motives, only results. She handed me a sealed report and said if I wanted to share it with legal counsel, I could. She said if I wanted to contact the matched person, I should do it carefully and through proper channels. I nodded and thanked her, even though my head felt like it was full of static. That afternoon, I went straight to my lawyer's office. I did not go to make a scene. I went because I had learned that surprises become dangerous if you carry them alone. My lawyer read the report, asked a few questions, and then made one call in front of me. He kept it short. When he ended the call, he told me I needed to attend the upcoming boardroom meeting, and he would attend with me. He told me to stay calm and answer only what I was asked. The boardroom meeting was the next morning. The company had set it up like a celebration. There were pastries on a side table, a screen displayed a launch countdown. People laughed too loudly, like they wanted confidence to be contagious. Priya stood near the front, moving like she owned the room. Grant was there too, dressed like he was part of leadership. Talia sat with him in the guest seating, looking relaxed, like she was watching a show she already knew the ending of. When I walked in with my lawyer, several heads turned fast. Priya's smile froze for a second, then returned in a smaller version. Grant looked surprised, then quickly looked amused, like he thought I was making a desperate move. Talia's eyes narrowed, and I could see her trying to decide whether to look annoyed or dismissive. Clara Vance arrived a minute later. The room shifted around her. Conversations lowered. People straightened their posture. She greeted a few executives, then her eyes landed on me. Her expression changed in a way I cannot fully describe. It was not anger, it was not warmth. It was recognition mixed with disbelief. She did not speak to me yet. She simply took her seat and nodded once toward my lawyer, like she understood why he was there. Priya began the meeting. She praised the team, praised the launch, and then casually mentioned transition updates. She framed it like a routine improvement. She said the company needed to reduce costs and remove slow rolls. She said I had been offered a generous exit, and she hoped I would take it gracefully. She spoke like she was reading a script written to make me look outdated. Clara stopped her. She said she wanted to hear from me directly before any transition talk continued. Priya blinked, then said she did not think that was necessary. Clara repeated herself, calmer the second time, and the room went quiet. I stood and kept my voice even. I said I was not there to argue or beg. I said I was there to correct the record and protect my work and my name. My lawyer placed a small stack of printed pages on the table in front of the board. He said they were dated records, calendar changes, access removals, and HR messages. He said the pattern showed a planned push-out while my work was still being used. Then my lawyer placed a second set of pages down. These were licensing documents tied to a small company I formed years earlier to hold 2 software components I built before joining my employer. The company had been using those components under a license agreement. The license had limits, it had renewal terms, it also had a clause that allowed termination if the company tried to assign, repackage, or transfer the components without permission. My lawyer said the company had recently attempted to move those components into a new partner framework, connected to Grant's advisory group. He said that step triggered the termination clause. He said a formal notice had already been filed and delivered, and continued use would create immediate legal and operational risk for the launch. Grant's face lost color. Priya started speaking quickly, saying there must be confusion. Clara lifted a hand and stopped her. She asked Grant if he had directed any part of that partner framework. Grant tried to answer in broad words, but Clara asked again, slower. He did not give a clean answer. Finally, my lawyer slid the sealed hospital report toward Clara. He said it was a personal matter, but it also created a conflict that could not be ignored in a board setting. Clara opened it, read for less than a minute, and then set it down with hands that looked suddenly unsteady. She called a short recess. People stood, unsure what to do. Priya tried to pull Grant into a corner. Talia stared at me like she had never seen me before. When Clara returned, she did not talk about feelings. She spoke like procedure. She said Grant's advisory role was suspended pending review. She said Priya was removed from launch leadership pending investigation. She instructed HR to pause any action against me immediately. She told counsel to secure the records and begin a formal compliance review. Then she looked directly at Grant and told him to leave the building. Grant opened his mouth like he wanted to argue, but no sound came out. He stood, stiff, and walked toward the door. Talia reached for his arm, then stopped herself when she noticed people watching. Priya sat down slowly, like her legs had stopped trusting her. I did not smile. I did not celebrate. I simply gathered my papers and followed my lawyer out of the boardroom. As the door closed behind me, the loud celebration screen kept looping the same bright countdown, but the room had no laughter left in it.